And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Megan Millen, Executive Director of Joliet Public Library. And on behalf of our board and staff, I would like to welcome you to Joliet Public Library. Tonight, we are proud to unveil our latest traveling exhibit, Violins of Hope. We're very grateful for our partnership with Jewish Community Centers of Chicago for making this exhibition possible. Thank you also to the Hubbard Junior High Honors Orchestra for providing music for us tonight. They were wonderful. When this presentation is over, please make your way to the lowest level of the library to see 6 Holocaust-era violins, some of the 70 pieces collected by Israeli violin makers Amnon and Avshi Weinstein, which are here on a tour this summer. This evening, I have the very great honor of introducing our guest speaker, Pastor Chris Edmonds, son of World War II hero Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds, who saved more than 200 Jewish American soldiers in a prisoner of war camp in Germany. Please welcome Pastor Edmonds.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate that warm greeting. Thank all of you for being here. It's a whole lot easier to speak to people than an empty room, so thank you for being here. I bring you greetings from my family in Maryville, Tennessee. Well, let me correct that. It's not Maryville, it's Merleville, where I'm from. Can you say Merle? Oh, that's music to my ears. Congratulations. You know, genuine, bona fide East Tennessee hillbillies. Welcome to the family. I also want to thank Megan and for the Jewish, the JCC of Chicago and all of their wonderful staff for having me a part of the Violins of Hope Chicago. Avshi and I are close friends, and we travel together some. He'll be here beginning tomorrow, and so we're excited about that. Also want to shout out to the Hubbard Honors Orchestra. They're fabulous, and I think they deserve another hand. Let's give them another round of applause. I love students and I love teachers. They are rock stars in my world, and I have 2 daughters who are teachers, so I'm grateful for all of our teachers. Elie Wiesel of blessed memory said, for the dead and the living we must bear witness. And we're bearing witness throughout Chicago with the Violins of Hope, as those violins have been recovered from the Holocaust and been restored. And they're being played all over the world to remind people of the brutality and of evil and the Nazis, and also to bring hope, because those instruments fill us with music that helps us to soar spiritually. And as we remember the Holocaust, we bear witness, sadly, to the 6 million Jewish brothers and sisters who were tragically, brutally murdered during the Holocaust, of which 1.5 million were precious children who never, ever had a chance to grow up. That blows my mind, and it's beyond my comprehension. They were brutally murdered by the Nazis, and that hatred that resonated through their culture then is still alive and well today. And that's one of the reasons I go and speak, is to help stop hate. And hate starts in our hearts, and it ends up in tragedy. And so I hope that your heart is not full of hate, and that you are ready to do good things for folks when they need a hand. The Holocaust also bears witness to our inspired lights, the Holocaust survivors who inspire us, and also to the liberators who helped liberate those death camps, and even to the heroic rescuers, of which my father is one. And those inspiring lights remind us that evil abounds, but that life is also precious, and though hatred tries to destroy us, love always wins. And I'm here to tell you that love is the answer, and love always wins. Aren't you glad that you're loved today? Some of you are. Well, one of the lights of the Holocaust is my father. He's a humble Christian man, a soldier, who loved God and loved people. And he made important choices in a Nazi POW camp. Choices that you and I pray will make every day of our lives, not in the fear of a Nazi POW camp, but in the goodness of our hearts as we encounter needs. Well, Dad loves soldiers. I do too. I hope that you do. How many of you have family members who are either in the military or have served in our military? Hold your hands up. Wow, look across the room. Almost every hand is raised. Aren't you grateful for our soldiers who put on that uniform? Do we have any in our midst today who are current military or former military? Would you just hold your hand up really high? We have some here. Let's give them a big round of applause. Now back home, I'd go, whoop, 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 whoop. I love our soldiers. You are so wonderful and amazing. You put on that uniform, you gave up your dreams and your hopes, and you settled in to protect us. And we live in an amazingly blessed country full of freedoms. Freedoms, sadly, that we take for granted. But I pray that we will remember the sacrifice that you, our veterans, have made and that our current soldiers are making. And we will rejoice in the freedoms that we have. So I want to again thank you so much for the honor of serving our country and for the honor of knowing you. We love you. Well, my story begins with an old diary, a weathered, fragile book. It belonged to a young man from Tennessee fighting for his country on a continent near the edge of collapse. Its owner, my father, passed away years earlier. And since then, his diary remained tucked away with other mementos from his time during World War II. And like all of our veterans, Dad served with distinction. And I'm grateful for that. Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds of the 106th Infantry was captured during the Battle of the Bulge and spent 100 harsh days in 2 German prisoner of war camps. Now, this was the story our family knew. To us, it was the totality of his service. And service he never, ever talked about. If you have members of your family who've been in the military, who've served in combat, they will rarely, if ever, talk about that because of the conditions that they faced. Dad was the same way. Now, while reading Dad's diary, a journal that he kept one evening, his words moved my heart. This was many years after his service. In it, Dad wrote a lot of things I'm not going to write about because they're not exactly nice to talk about. He also said, the Lord answered our prayers. He knew that God was with us and with him, and he answered his prayers. And then he said something very insightful, which is still true today. He said, I learned men even better than before. Some were good, some were bad. Some were better, and some were worse. Well, Dad's words ignited a fire in my heart, and I believe God's Spirit provoked me to continue my journey of discovery, to move beyond his diary and try to find out what really happened to him during his time of service. So late one evening, just past midnight, I Googled his name and rank on my computer. Remarkably, Dad's name appeared in a New York Times article entitled Richard Dixon's Search for a New York Home. The article recounts how an attorney named Lester Tanner, who lives in New York, sold his historic townhouse to the president. And this was an amazing moment in Lester's life, but also an amazing moment for me as I read that. He sold it to President Nixon in 1980. And in the article, Mr. Tanner recounts how his master sergeant, Roddy Edmonds, saved his life. Well, I'm stunned. I'm absolutely amazed. What is Dad name doing in an article in the New York Times about the president? And who is Lester Tanner? And what does he mean by bravery? Is Mr. Tanner still alive? I mean, the questions keep coming and coming. He has to be in his late 80s or early 90s at this point in his life. And if he is still alive, where is he? And so I began searching for Lester, and I look, and after several months pass, I finally find Lester Tanner. And guess where I find him? New York City, baby, here I come. So we pack up, we load up, just like the Beverly Hillbillies and the Clampetts, and we head to New York City. And there's a story, there's lots of stories in that. But I get to meet Lester for the first time, and for the first time I hear the amazing story of my father and his heroic men during World War II. Well, Dad was the highest ranking officer in a Stalag for non-commissioned officers, Stalag 9A, near Zegenheim, Germany. It was late January 1945, near the end of the war. Now, even in the POW camps, the Germans would segregate the Jewish American soldiers from non-Jews, and they would send them to their certain death in murderous concentration camps. Even the army would tell Jewish soldiers, if you're ever captured, to destroy your dog tags, which denoted the letter H for Hebrew, and never mention your Jewish identity. Why? Because it was very, very dangerous for the American Jewish soldier. We owed an extra debt of gratitude for the Jewish soldiers who donned an American uniform and went over to fight against the Germans. And I'm so grateful that they did. Well, on the evening of January 26, the Germans sent orders to my father that only the Jewish men were to fall out at the next morning's roll call. Just the Jews, no one else. Anyone who disobeyed the orders would be shot. And so, without hesitation, Lester said, your father received those orders, and he turned to all of us in the barracks. And he said, we're not doing that. Tomorrow morning, we all fall out. And Dad sent orders to the other 4 barracks of Americans, commanding them to do the same. It was bitterly cold that morning, January 27, 1945. As the Nazi commander approached, he couldn't believe his eyes. All the Americans, nearly 1,300 American GIs were standing in sharp formation. Now we need to understand that many of those men had to be helped out there. They were in serious shape, bad shape. And many of them were helped out there. But I also want you to know that every one of them came. They knew that they could be shot for disobeying those orders, but they all went together. I'm so glad that they did, aren't you? All the Americans were there. The German, Major Ziegman, he's not your ordinary soldier. He's not the commandant of the camp. He's a major from high command. As a matter of fact, he's the eyes and ears of Hitler in the POW camps. He reports to General Jodl, who reports to Hitler directly. Anytime there's something going on in the POW camps that requires some kind of attention to make Hitler look good, Major Ziegman shows up. And Major Ziegman has issued the orders. He's there to take the Jewish men away. No one has ever disobeyed his orders. Well, Dad would have none of it. Ziegman rushed over to my father, and he couldn't believe that the sergeant was standing in front of all of his men. And he screamed, "They can't all be Jews!" To which my father declared, "We're all Jews here." Wow, Lester said. When your father said that, he said, we were all stunned. He said, we were just as stunned as the major, because the major stood and looked and didn't know how to respond. And Lester said, your father's words, for those who could hear, made us feel a little braver. We stood a little taller. He said, and then your father continued. He said, Major, all that's required by the Geneva Convention is name, rank, and serial number. Don't quote regulations to me, screamed the major. Were my orders not clear? I want the Jews, just the Jews. Well, standing on Dad's left, Sergeant Lester Tannenbaum. You see him there, a.k.a. Lester Tannen. He's a 19-year-old Jewish kid from the Bronx of New York. He's one of Dad's best soldiers. He had been trained by Dad since basic, and they loved one another and respected one another. On Dad's right was Sergeant Paul Stern, a combat medic from the 28th Division. Paul had seen many, many terrible things as a combat medic. And he would have to run through withering fire with that medic patch on as a symbol for the Germans to take a shot at. It was like he was a sitting duck. He had survived that, and now he's in the POW camp. He's another fine young Jewish soldier from the boroughs of New York. He was number one in Dad's book. Well, ensuring eye contact, Dad leaned into the major, and he said, "Major, name, rank, serial number. That's all you'll get." Well, the major became furious. He turned blood red. He leaned into my father, he pulled his pistol, and he pressed it hard into my father's forehead. "Sergeant, one last chance. You will order the Jews to step forward, or I will shoot you right now." Well, by this point, Dad and his men had faced untold horrors. Brutal battle, the Battle of the Bulge, which was the bloodiest and largest battle of World War II, where 89,000 American soldiers were killed, captured, or wounded. They'd been marched on a death march several days and nights through deep snow and frozen ice. It's one of the worst winters on record in Germany in the past 100 years. No food, no water, no hope. March and march and march. Skip Friedman, dear POW friend of mine from Cleveland, Ohio, told me, he said, if you didn't march, you didn't last. So we helped one another as best we could to keep marching. They'd also been marched to boxcars, the same boxcars that were taking Jewish men, women, boys, and girls to their death. And they were packed in like sardines, standing room only. No room to sit or lay down or use the restroom, no room for anything. And they went deeper into Germany, rumbling on the tracks. And when they would get to a certain point where there was a rail station that would shut off to the side, they would pull off often so that armament could pass them and head to the front. On Christmas Eve, 1944, they pulled into the Limburg train yard. And the skies had cleared that morning, and the British were able to finally get their bombers out on the loose. And the British flew over and bombed that train yard with American POWs against tanks and howitzers and all kinds of armament there. They were in unmarked boxcars, and so those bombs fell upon our American soldiers. Dad said the bombing was the worst. They had experienced 40 days of starvation. 40 days of intentional, willful starvation by the Germans. You see, their goal was to make American and any other prisoners become animals and lose their humanity. And I want to tell you that my father and his men, they never surrendered to that inhumanity. They stood together as one and fought the Germans the best they could. But they were losing nearly a pound a day on average. They were miserable. They were haunted by lice and trench foot, dysentery, forever hungry, forever cold. Just 2 days earlier from this moment where the gun is pressed to my father's forehead, they were marched into the second camp for the first time. Stood all day intimidated by the Germans and the guard dogs. They were beaten with rifle butts. At the end of that day, they had to watch the savage execution of a young Russian soldier And it was brutal what they had to watch. Some would turn away and they'd get smacked with the rifle butts or bitten by the dogs, forced to watch. And then, at the end of that cruel death, the commandant came to my father and said, "This will happen to you and any of your soldiers who disobey our orders." Dad had been shot, he'd been interrogated, he'd been beaten, he'd been smacked with rifle butts, he'd been kicked, he'd been bitten by dogs. And the only word that he would share with me when I got older and I said, "Dad, what happened to you over there?" He said, "I don't want to talk about it." And he didn't. I said, "Dad, what happened to you over there?" He said, "Son, all I'll tell you is we were humiliated." Maybe that's why Dad wrote in his diary, "No one can realize the horrors an infantry soldier goes through. You get scared, and I mean scared." So Dad was scared, and all those men were scared, but they were strong, and they were courageous. You say it takes courage to fight the fear that wants to keep you silent, that wants to keep you in your seat and not stand up for what's right. I'm grateful that they stood up for what was right. You see, their dad stood. Along with his men, they stood strong, they stood brave, they stood resolute. Lester told me, he said, "Your father, he never, ever wavered." I wonder if Dad was recalling a favorite scripture of his. "The Lord is my light and salvation. Whom shall I fear?" See, I didn't find out till later, much later in my research and in my investigation, as I stumbled across one of his best friend's diaries. He had passed away many years ago, but he had left it with his daughter. And I was able to find her and be able to look at that diary. What a privilege it was. And he said that Roddy had smuggled a Bible into the camp and that he read it every day. And that they all used it for their religious services, their various religious services. I'm so grateful that he did. He loved God's Word. But he not only loved it, he tried to live it. And I pray the same for me, that I could try to live a life that's worthy of God's goodness and pleasure. So suddenly, Dad spoke. Gun still pressed to his head, finger still on the trigger. He spoke calmly, he spoke courageously. He said, "Major, you can shoot me, but you'll have to kill us all, because we know who you are. And you'll be a war criminal when we win this war, and you will pay." Lester said, "I don't know where your father got that courage, and where he even got the words to say what he did." But he said, "I'm so grateful." He said, "I've never forgotten him for that." Lester also said Siegmund turned white as a ghost. He said, "The arm that held the gun began to tremble as the words, the truth of the words of my father sank into his mind and his spirit." But time froze. No movement, no sounds, nothing. Just the smoke-like puffs of breath rising heavenward. And Lester said, "And lots of prayers." Well, in 2016, I had the fortunate opportunity to travel where Dad looked evil in the eye and dared a Nazi to shoot. I went there thanks to the generosity of the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, along with a film crew. And we filmed a documentary based upon Dad's story. And now I want you to hear the rest of the story, not from me, but from some of the men, some of the Jewish men who were there.
My father passed away in August of 1985. I was 26 years old. You know, my father, he never really talked about his experiences in World War II or his time as a prisoner of war. He would say, "Son, there's some things I'd rather not talk about." While my father was a prisoner of war, he kept a diary. Late one night after reading his diary, I Googled his name and rank, and the first link that came up was an article in the New York Times.
I was being interviewed by the New York Times in 2008. All of a sudden, I remembered that there was a Master Sergeant, Roddy Edmonds, who saved my life when he defied the Germans and POW camp. That's all I said.
In the middle of that article, Lester mentions the bravery and courage of his Master Sergeant, Roddy Edmonds. And I said, I got to find out what really happened to my dad during his POW experience.
I was born in the Bronx on August 8, 1923.
January 27, 1924.
I was born in Cleveland on April 24, 1924.
June 17, 1925, in Brooklyn, New York. I got the draft notice shortly after I turned 18, and I reported in for the draft exam, and they found me totally acceptable. I was breathing.
I was 18 years old. I was assigned as a combat medic to care for the wounded soldiers on the battlefield.
I was in headquarters company of the 422nd Infantry Regiment of the 106th Division. And that's where I met Les Tanner.
And I was Sergeant Lester Tannenbaum of the headquarters company. And Roddy Edmonds was the Master Sergeant. Roddy grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. He probably never met a Jew in Tennessee when he went into the Army.
My dog tag had the information on it, my name and my serial number, and the letter H for Hebrew, so that if they found our bodies, they would know how to bury us.
One of the things we were told that if we were captured, we should destroy our dog tags.
Because being a Jew in that circumstance, we didn't know what our future was.
And off we went to the front. We went over as replacements for filling up the slots that had been opened by casualties. It was December, it was snowy, it was the coldest winter in 50 years.
We replaced the 2nd Division on the front, right in the Siegfried line, on the German side of the border.
We were very vulnerable.
The men had come and were told that this was a quiet sector. And when they got here, just 6 days after they got here, the war came to them.
The first day of the attack was December 16th.
I awakened and heard shell fire.
St. Vith was being attacked. That's our division headquarters 10 miles in back of us.
We were there when the Germans broke through with the Battle of the Bulge, and they broke through in force.
They broke through north of us and south of us.
We were completely surrounded, and we knew we were cut off.
Our position was untenable, and we finally decided to make a break for it. And we are cut off and surrounded by columns of German tanks, guns, troops.
Captain Forster said, "It's hopeless."
I'm reading from my father's diary that he kept. It was a hopeless cause in our case. When Captain Foster surrendered us, he did a very wise thing. Our rifles were no good against tanks and 88 fire.
And out we came to become part of what was the largest collection of captured GIs in World War II, from the 106th, from the 28th, and others. We began to start our march to we didn't know where.
There was a concern that the Germans would just shoot us up. When you're in brutal hands, like the Germans were, you're scared as hell.
I particularly was concerned because my name was obviously Jewish.
And then we got to the railhead, Gerolstein.
They loaded us on boxcars.
We were packed like sardines in that boxcar. No food or water on the 4-day trip to Bad Orem.
So the boxcars we were in turned out to be exactly the same cars that were taking the Jews to concentration camps.
And we went further into Germany.
Boarded train, Thursday, 21 December 44. Arrived Stalag 9B, Bad Orem. Monday, 25 December 44. Registered Tuesday, 26 December 44.
We had to register. Name, rank, serial number.
But then they started asking questions about your religion.
The Germans segregated the Jewish POWs.
And we were assigned to the Jewish barracks.
A special barracks surrounded by barbed wire within the prison. We were in a prison within the prison. The order came down one day that the non-commissioned officers were getting on trucks and were being taken to another camp.
They took all the sergeants and corporals, all the non-commissioned officers, whether they were Jewish or not.
And luckily, I am taken out of that isolated place at Bad Orb, and the next thing I know, I'm on a train going to Ziegenhain.
The Jewish POWs who had been left behind were shipped to a slave labor camp.
All of them later were sent to Berger, and many of them died there.
Arrived Stalag 9A, Friday, 26 January 45. I'm walking along Main Street of Stalag 9A, Ziegenhain. People are living here, even today. It's really hard to imagine that these barracks still stand almost intact the way that they were when Dad and his men were here.
British were there, French were there, Russians were there, and now we were coming in to occupy a quadrant of that whole thing.
There were about 1,200 American prisoners. Of the 1,200, I would estimate maybe 200 were Jewish.
In Ziegenhain, in my barracks, Lester was in it, Paul was in it, Roddy was in it.
So there's about 240 men in the barracks. You were given one thin blanket. That was all you had.
You went to bed hungry, you got up hungry, you were hungry forever.
Dinner was a piece of bread. We had 10 men sharing one loaf of ersatz bread. So it was probably half flour and half sawdust.
I lost 60 pounds in 3 months. It was January 27, 1945, when the Germans announced that all Jewish American prisoners would fall out the following morning. Just them. Anyone who didn't fall out would be shot. Same thing that they had said at Bad Orb. Roddy, for the first time in his experience, was in complete command. There was no one there to give him orders. It was his decision. He said, we're not going to do that. Everyone is going to fall out just as we do every morning. That following morning, Roddy is standing at the head of formation, and I was standing by his side.
I was there, the German was there, and Lester was there. So I heard every word that the commandant said.
Major Siegmann comes up to Roddy, and he says, you can't all be Jews. And Roddy said, we are all Jews.
That famous line, we're all Jews here, that will live in Jewish history.
Takes out his Luger and puts it next to Roddy's forehead, and he says, you will order the Jews to step forward, or I will shoot you right now. And Roddy said to him, Major, you can shoot me, you can shoot all of us, but we know who you are. And this war is almost over, and you'll be a war criminal. And with that, the Major lowered his Luger, about-faced, went back to his headquarters.
We were able to track the war pretty closely, even as we were POWs. So we knew we were within days of being liberated, hopefully.
The German commanders informed Roddy that they were going to evacuate the camp.
They don't want to be around when the Americans come.
And under Roddy's leadership, we refused. And that's why I'm here to tell you about the story today.
Roddy said, we're just too weak to go on a long march.
We were in such lousy shape. The chances of coming out of that alive are not good.
Nobody marches out of camp. You break ranks and you run back into the barracks. And you keep doing that all day.
The day dawns, and in come the Germans. House, house!
Rouse, getting up, going back and forth.
We can see the British are moving out. Everybody else is moving out. We're still standing there. Finally, they give up, the Germans.
The German officers came up to Roddy and said, okay, camp is yours. And they marched out. We were left alone in the camp.
It gets very quiet. So now a few of us climb up on the roof of our barracks, and then we see 2 lines of tanks.
We were liberated on March 30th by an American armored group.
The 6th Armored Division, as it turns out.
They were amazed to see these American soldiers, thin, hungry. It was such a happy day.
We were liberated on March 30th, which was the 2nd day of Passover.
And every time I ran a Seder, I would make this point because it was the date of my freedom.
I've made new friends and lost some. I don't know whether all my boys are alive or not, but I pray that they are. It all seems sort of a bad dream.
Well, they took us to Camp Lucky Strike, and I lost track of Roddy, and I never saw him again after that day, but it was never out of my mind. I have to tell you, that experience and Roddy was a defining experience in my life.
Roddy was incredible. He never really got his recognition, except among us.
We were very lucky to have him with us.
That such people can exist gives you hope, maybe, for humanity.
We stood there, we were the witnesses. We were the witnesses.
I've been following the footsteps of my father, and it's led me here. The lives of 200 Jewish men were forever changed right here.
It wasn't only my life. Our lives multiplied. I have 4 children. I have 6 grandchildren. I have 2 great-grandchildren. So I have 18 people that wouldn't be here without him. Multiply that by 200, and you can see how important that decision has been.
That's the biggest joy for me, is to see the real people, the lives that have been touched and changed.
Roddy could no more have turned over any of his men to the Nazis than he could stop breathing. He just couldn't do it. A righteous man.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so grateful to the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous for their support of my father and for their generosity in creating that documentary. That is available online that you can download and use if you prefer to do that in your synagogues, in your churches, in your community centers, wherever you would like to use that. In 2016, let me just ask, can I have 5 more minutes? 5 more minutes? Okay. Because now we're going to get to today. In 2016, Yad Vashem honored my father as righteous among the nations. And as many of you know, righteous among the nations is the highest honor a non-Jew can receive for rescuing or saving Jewish people during the Holocaust. Most people did nothing, just stood by and watched. But thankfully, my father and 27,000 others caught up in the conflict of war stood up for what was right. And if you heard Lester, he said that was the defining moment of his life. As a matter of fact, Lester said what he learned from Dad was to take the risk. Regardless of the risk and regardless of the circumstances, do what's right. And then he looked at me with a grin. He said, you know, as a New York attorney, that's not always easy. Lester is just, he passed away in January, sadly, but one of my dearest friends. Matter of fact, today is his 100th birthday. So let's give Lester a round of applause as well, and his family. If you hold up your hand, give me a 5. You know what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. Dad is only the 5th American to be named among the righteous. Give me a number 1. He is the first U.S. soldier to be named righteous among the nations. Another number 1. He is the first of the righteous to save American Jews. And then my favorite, he's the first Tennessean to be righteous. And I'm so grateful for the nation of Israel and for all our Jewish brothers and sisters here in America and around the globe for the incredible honor that they have bestowed upon my father. To me, it's the highest honor he will receive this side of eternity, and I'm so grateful for that. At the ceremony, I said, if you ask Dad why he did it, he would say, I was just doing my job. He would say, I protected my men, I opposed my enemy, I honored my Lord, I was just doing my job. But you know, President Obama took time out of his schedule to come to honor my father at the Israeli embassy, which I am forever grateful for. And he said, Chris, your father may have said he was just doing his job, but what he did went above and beyond the call of duty. His moral compass never wavered. He stayed true to his faith. And then he added this, I cannot imagine a greater expression of Christianity than to say, I too am a Jew. Well, the Righteous Award was a great blessing, and the ceremony was remarkable. Another great blessing has been meeting some of the men whom Dad helped save, and some of the men and their families who I have become so very close to and who I love dearly. We've got Sonny Fox of California, and I don't know if some of you grew up in the New York area, but Sonny Fox used to be the host of Wonderama. Anybody ever watch Wonderama growing up? It was the first children's program. It was very popular. And Sonny was the host of that and was later an NBC executive over the years. Lester Tanner of New York, an incredible attorney. Paul Stern of Virginia, he's the gentleman in the wheelchair, and he owned his own clothing company. And then Henry Hank Friedman, who's in the picture to the left there. And Henry was the first, he was a part of Sony back in the early days. He worked for a big company in Atlanta. So he helped get the Sony product to the U.S., so we're grateful for that. And then Skip Friedman, another attorney in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, and an incredible individual. I love these men, I love their families, and I still stay close to them even today. And they're great examples. They're heroes in my book, but they're great examples not only of what they did over there, but how they lived when they got back here. You know, their victory over the horrors of war didn't defeat them, but rather inspired them to live ordinary lives of extraordinary influence. And I love them for it. So Dad's legacy are these men and their families and their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. I think Lester said in the film he had 3 great-grandchildren. Well, he's actually got 6 now. And that those generations continue to grow. I was sitting with Lester in his apartment one day, listening to all the hubbub of New York City outside the window. And he looked at me and he said, Chris, have you ever stopped to calculate the lives that your father saved? I said, well, I've thought a lot about it, but I've never stopped and actually tried to add it up. He said, well, I have. He said, based upon your father saving more than 200 of us Jewish men, and then all of us, all 1,300 of us men at the end of our experience when we marched out, we refused to march out and sent the Germans packing. He said more than 13,000 people are alive and well today because of your father's righteous actions. Wow. Well, what lesson can we learn today? We can learn the lesson of greater love or selfless love. One of Dad's favorite scriptures was John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. And Dad chose to lay down his life for his men, for his friends, for his comrades, some of the men he didn't even know. But he chose to do that because it was based upon his love and faith in God and his love for humanity. He was pretty simple-minded man. He believed that God created everyone in God's image, and that in that image, all of us are created equal in the sight of God. He also believed that God is a good God and that God loves all of us equally. And therefore, because God loves me equally, I should love everyone else equally, just the same. And so he believed his purpose in this world was to bring good to others for the good of God. You see, I don't believe we're sent to this planet Earth by accident. I believe we are placed on Earth by the precious hand of God, and he calls us to do what's right for others, to be good to them. And so I want to challenge you as I challenge myself every day, each and every day, when you wake up, I want you to wake up and say, others first, me last. That's easy to say. It's hard to do. Because I love to run around with three friends, my best amigos, me, myself, and I. Don't you? Those are my running buddies. And I usually take care of them first and foremost, but that's not why we're here. We're here to make this world better and brighter by doing what's best for others through greater love. See, greater love isn't the love that I have personally. It's a love that comes from above, that takes people and places them at the level where God resides. People are placed of great respect and highest dignity. You see, the way we do it here in this world, in this life, we say, well, we should just tolerate others. I'm sorry, I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be loved. You want to be loved. Let me ask you, are you glad you're loved? Oh, that was weak. Are you glad you're loved? Yes. Absolutely. Look at somebody sitting close to you and say, you're the best looking thing I've seen all day. Now, doesn't that feel good? See, that's love. That's what I'm talking about. So give that person a high five. Yeah. Now give them $100. Whoop. Wait. I don't love you that much. But you know, when I said that, you know what happened? Love burst out all over this room. And love is in all of our hearts. And love is the answer to the evil and the anti-Semitism and the racism and the hatred that's in this world. And it's all around us. And we've been sent by God to go and put the hate out. And the way you do that, love always wins. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the unvarnished truth and the unconditional love wins the day. And that's what won the day in that camp with Dad and his men. When he looked that old German major in the eyes and he told him the truth, Major, you don't want to do this. You're going to regret this the rest of your life. You're going to pay for this. You're going to be held accountable for this. Don't do this. And it got through. My father was loving that major by telling him the truth. So as we leave here, I'm encouraging you to join Roddy's regiment. And do what the Talmud tells us to do. He who saves one life saves what? The entire world. So leave here ready to do what's right for others, regardless of the risk, regardless of the circumstances, Treat people with the highest respect, even if they're your enemies, even if they hate you, treat them with the highest respect. And go save your world. Be an upstander. Love them and serve them with one kind word, one good deed, one loving action, one person at a time. Be the hero.